So often the news seems far away, interesting, but not part of our daily lives. The goings-on in Washington, D.C. make us shake our heads, but it seems there is little we can do. As state legislatures make decisions calculated to provoke, our blood pressure rises, but what can we do? The battle over tariffs has yet to touch my checkbook, but you know, I come from a long line of farmers, and I know a long line of farmers lying awake at night. Even in Chicago, only miles away, the world's depravity rears its head every day, but we touch it only when we touch newspaper ink or click on a Facebook post. But every once in a while, the news explodes in our faces and we cannot avoid it anymore. It happened to me. It happened to our family this week. A person of my family's acquaintance has become national news as she and her family were detained for lack of proper documentation. She and her husband came to the U.S. more than a decade ago seeking political asylum from a dangerous Central American regime. But like so many cases of its kind, it got caught up in the courts. While waiting for a response, they raised a family. Both parents in the family attained advanced degrees. They have worked responsible jobs. They have always paid their taxes. They weren't hiding from anyone. They were just waiting. But for some reason, the immigration system that had forgotten about them for so many years suddenly remembered, and violently so. The details are straight out of a Jason Bourne movie. Access to the family was acquired through deception. A screaming 5-year-old was torn from her mother's arms at gunpoint by heavily armed federal agents. Innocent bystanders were swept up into the raid and later released, but only later. The front door of the house was left open after the raid, and their house was emptied by looters. Witnesses said that the agents laughed as they paraded the family out of their house in their pajamas to waiting vehicles. Regardless of where you stand on immigration reform or enforcement, the cruelty of this raid in a town an hour from here was horrifying. And woven around the sometimes remote, sometimes very real debates about immigration and abortion and trade and guns and tariffs and military aggression are the words of the 11th commandment. The commandment Jesus gave his disciples before he was crucified. Perhaps it sounds cheesy to you and incredibly predictable that Jesus' last words to his disciples would be something about love. What else would Jesus say after all? Go Bears, or make Bethlehem great again, or don't forget your raincoat. But Jesus' commandment to love wasn't mushy or romantic or predictable. It was born of both experience and fear. Jesus' experience with love. From before he was born, Jesus' earthly parents, Joseph and Mary, loved him without question after a little bit of encouraging from an angel. In spite of rumors and innuendo and mockery and serious questions about Jesus' paternity, their love for him was fierce. It was deep. It was relentless. He knew firsthand that love has nothing to do with how we feel. Love is a decision. Love is a fact. And the fear that drove the way he loves, even as Jesus' fan base grew, so did his foe base. Foes in powerful places, foes with financial means, foes with no scruples. It would have been the most easiest thing in the world for Jesus to have adopted their hateful, dishonest, bloodthirsty practices for himself. After all, it is the way of the world. But Jesus knew that if even for a heartbeat he gave in to that impulse, his whole ministry would sink. Hating those who hate you, That's a natural impulse. Tolerating those who hate us, we think we're really big when we pull that off. But loving those who hate you, loving them to death, it is a rare and a holy thing. Love one another was a lesson buried deep in Jesus' complicated DNA. But on this night, the night described in John 13, even Jesus' love was tested. The danger was neither remote nor theoretical. The danger had its feet under Jesus' supper table. Judas. Ever notice no one has ever named their child Judas? Judas, who had been with Jesus from the very beginning, who was one of his closest friends, would soon become the agent of his assassination. And as Judas disappeared into the night, and Jesus' remaining disciples suddenly started to realize what Judas was about to do, Jesus reminded them of his mission, a mission that would soon belong solely to them. Love one another, he said sternly, even Judas, even Peter, even Pilate. How is that possible? Left to ourselves, it's not. As you could tell from the way I started the sermon, since I can't even spell subtle, right? You never have to wonder what I'm thinking. My sympathies lie with the undocumented three-generation Kenosha family, one of whom is a Lutheran pastor, to whom my husband handed her diploma 5 years ago, which is how my family is connected to this case. I have no difficulty loving them, understanding their sorrow, defending them. Love the undocumented immigrant in our midst, of course. We know their names. But what of the federal agents who took them into custody? What of the judge who signed the warrant? What of the guards at the detention center? What of the looters who robbed them blind? Left to my own ugly imaginings, I have nothing good to say to them or about them. So what would Jesus have to say to this disciple? The same thing he said to Judas as he slipped into the darkness. The same thing he said to his disciples: love them. Love them. Love them because I do. So how do I love those with whom I violently disagree, those whose lives make no sense to me? Jesus has said, don't care. Don't care how you feel. Don't care what you think of them. Don't care how you voted. I don't have to agree with them. They don't have to make sense to me because they are Jesus' sheep. Remember Jesus, the good shepherd of all the sheep? They are God's children. They are my brothers and sisters. And though my love for them may come with gritted teeth and a heavy sigh, I have no choice. So how have I decided to love as Jesus loves when the people I am called to love carry out policies with which I disagree? I pray for them. I pray for their safety as they carry out their work. I give thanks for their loyalty to a mission. I have to believe that their work is well-intentioned. And I pray for their families, that their families will never suffer what so many families do. And I know that though you may disagree with where my sympathies lie, I know that you could also, with very little trouble, conjure an I struggle to love you list of your own. Perhaps you would even flip my story, finding the undocumented family at the center of it worthy of scorn and the federal agents to be heroes. Regardless of where your political inclinations or heartfelt sympathies lie, the commandment applies. Love one another, Jesus whispered to Judas back. Love one another, he ordered his gaping disciples. Love one another, he said to me in the dark of a night when I lay in bed, filled with hatred and fear. Love one another. Such love is not a feeling, it is a decision. It is a decision we can only choose to make the way Jesus made it, because left to our own devices, our hearts are cold and our hearts are hard. So how do we love one another, and why in the world would we do that? Because that unquestioning, intentional love is the way Jesus loves us. We are Judas who betrays. We are Peter who denies. We are those who harm the innocent. We are both undocumented and citizen. We are rich, we are poor. We are left, we are right. But Jesus' love for us is the same. And he's prepared to leave his disciples. He turned that hard-working, heartbreaking, mind-boggling love over to us. Love the world, Jesus said. Love the world the way I have loved you.